Hi, I am Dequitem, an armored fighter in non-choreographed night fights. And today we want to compare samurai armor with knight armor. These are only two examples of special armor types that have a huge variety of different shapes and sometimes different functions for different situations. So these are only two examples, but I think it will be interesting to compare these two. My knight armor is a mix of German and Italian armors for men-at-arms from the second half of the 15th century. This special armor set is a reproduction of a later samurai armor from the 16th to 18th century. I want to compare these two armor sets in two different categories. First, we want to look if samurai armor is indeed faster, more nimble, or if a knight's armor can stand up in terms of climbing, jumping over small walls, or standing up from the ground, running in armor. In the movement category, I will also look if it's easier to fight in samurai armor and if it's easier to fight in grappling or on the ground. The second category is, of course, protection. And there I will look if samurai armor is weaker than knight armor. If the knight armor can protect you better in melee combat and, of course, ranged combat. Even when many people think that knight armor feels clumsy and hard to move in, it's not true. Because most movements are without any restrictions. So if you walk and move, raise your arms and do normal stuff, you don't feel any restrictions. Even in fighting in normal positions, it's no problem and I can't feel any resistance at any point. If your armor sits pretty well, you normally can raise your arms pretty easily in most positions. I can move my arms here in nearly full extension. These plates can slide into each other. Also, high guards in different positions are no problem at all. If you fight in knight armor, most positions are half sword techniques. And there it's of course even easier to place your weapon in the right position without any restriction. The forearms on samurai armor are normally well protected, but the connections between these plates are often only covered with mail armor. The mail armor can offer a little bit protection against cuts and thrusts, but not much protection against concussive force. And the upper arms covered with small plates make them movable, but also not effective against thrusts and hard impacts. Compared with European armor, this has the effect that it feels much easier to move your arms, but compared effectively, there isn't a huge difference when you try to move in most sword positions. So, of course, you can raise your arms easily and lower them. And there isn't much in the way when you do this on your arms, but there are the shoulder protections and the wider helm that can come in the way when you try to raise your arms in the sky. So I can only raise my arms till here, and then the side plates of the Kabuto make problems to raise the arms higher. In all other circumstances, I can raise and move my arms completely free. And it feels much lighter and faster than with European armor. But there isn't much difference. Grappling can be a little bit harder. This is the closest angle of my leg that I can reach. So if I try to push my knee more forward, this lower plate will bite into my upper leg. Ground fighting feels a little bit easier with samurai armor. If you are on the ground and your opponent tries to attack you, it's easier to bend your feet back to push your opponent away or work here in grappling. So on your back, samurai armor has a big advantage. Of course, it's easier for your opponent to step in vital areas like the upper leg, but that's a risk that you have to take in these kinds of armors. And it's a big deal to have no mail protection here, because with mail armor you need both hands on the dagger to push through. But here you can even slice up your vital blood vessels. The only big problem in movement in full armor is the weight. So you feel a little bit slower and it feels harder to move quickly. But if you don't hold back to save some energy for later, harder fights, it's possible to nearly move in the same speed like without armor. Compared to European armor, there isn't much difference in weight categories. So this armor set is only 5 kilos lighter than my full European knightly armor. So it's not a huge difference. And all the weight is, like with the European armor, onto your hips. There isn't much weight on your shoulders. So in some parts you feel the difference between unarmored and heavily armored in samurai armor. In the first test, we will try to jump over this wall. standing up in armor is not a big deal. But you can feel a small difference between standing up without armor or standing up in samurai armor. Because the chest plate is a little bit bigger than in European armor, so I feel pressure on my hips. Is the sword lying on the ground? The most difficult thing to grab the sword is actually to get a good grip with mittens. So let's test in which armor you can run faster. In a conclusion, if we compare knightly and samurai armor is only slightly more nimble, slightly faster. So it's not a big deal in most cases. Of course, knight armor does protect you much more. But even in this type of armor are of course some gaps, like here in my left armpit area or under my mail armor inside the legs. On the back side you can see here some unarmored parts. It's not big, but necessary for movement. Same inside the gauntlets, but my helmet is fully protected. There is no gap here at my neck. In the back of my armpit and inside my arms are some gaps, but in combat it's really hard to aim for these gaps because they are very, very small. We made some tests with daggers and sword against mail armor, and mail armor is surprisingly effective, even against the sharpest tips of swords and daggers. Only with the strongest and most powerful hit there is a slight chance to penetrate thick riveted mail armor.
Not piercing.
Only if you push with two hands and the full weight of your body into your opponent's mail armor, it's kind of easy to penetrate the mail.
I cracked the ring and finished him.
With a two-handed blade like a longsword, it's kind of easier to penetrate mail armor. But here, most attempts will not penetrate the mail. Even with a half-sword thrust in here, there's a good chance, but it don't have to penetrate always. But on samurai armor, it's not that hard to injure someone or kill the samurai. Because not only thrusts to different areas like the face can be fatal, there are also plenty of cuts that can injure you as well. Of course, there are cuts like inside the legs that can be a big problem. But like on medieval armor, there isn't much space to cut. Of course, inside the arms, there can be places to cut as well, but not very effectively. And even here on the kabuto, there isn't much space that can cut. Now it hit my teeth. But here, the neck is nearly fully covered against cuts because these all hit my menpo. Only if you hit here the back of my neck, there's a very small place that can be cut. Here, under these cords, are hidden plates as well, so there isn't much space to get cut here. The most dangerous part are the armpits, but here samurai armor can be fully armored as well. So if you see this here, there are some extra plates and mail armor for deep thrusts into your heart behind the chest plate. Of course, these will not protect the upper arm as well, like on the European examples, but this is actually pretty good against many thrusts to your heart and lungs. The helmet of the samurais, the kabuto, is indeed an open-face helmet. Yes, it has some face protection like a standard on European armors and some mask parts that protect most of your face, but indeed your eyes and mouth and even the nose area is normally unprotected in war. The ropes and cords to attach the different plates of samurai armors are indeed a weak point of samurai armor. So there are some hidden mechanics like these blade catchers at the side of the kabuto to prevent that swords can cut these plates off. So yes, it's kind of a weaker armor that gives you more mobility. But keep in mind, you wear samurai armor with an open face. So if you have an open face, it doesn't make sense to armor up you fully without any gaps, because you have to be fast to protect your biggest weak point. And you need an open face for shooting arrows and fighting effectively on battle, because samurais were often archers or gunners and needed an open helmet. Knight armor hasn't that big weak spot in the most vulnerable area, so it can be a little bit more protective and slow you down a little bit more. Yes, samurai armor is less specialized. It has to be effective in long-range fights with guns and war bows, and also in close-range fights with sword naginatas and yaris. A knight armor in a duel is more effective and gives the knight a small advantage over his samurai opponent. But if you are on a campaign, knight armor is hard to wear without help like a squire, while samurai armor can be a little bit more comfortable for a normal soldier. So, in most cases, in a real duel, a knight has an advantage over a samurai. But you don't always fight. In some cases, it makes more sense to compare a samurai as an archer with the European equivalent of an archer. So a longbowman or a Genoese crossbowman. In these cases, the samurai armor is actually superior. Only if we try to compare heavy infantry in Europe or heavy cavalry with lances in Europe, we see samurai as heavy infantry or horsemen. It's hard for the samurai to compete with the protection of European armor. Samurai armor is a very good all-rounder and makes many stuff right or similar to European armor. But of course, European armor is much more specialized. So there are the light archers and the heavy infantry and cavalry in Europe. And samurai have to work for both. And there are, of course, drawbacks if you try to do both with only one armor type. Then, thanks for watching. Don't rage in the comments, stay safe, and don't kill your trading partners. Bye bye.